Welcome to episode 44 of Engaging Franciscan Wisdom. My name is Sister Michelle Lallier, and I'm happy to introduce our guest host, Darleen Pryds. Welcome, Darleen.
Thanks, Michelle. In this episode, Athena Godet-Calogeras, a self-described Franciscan activist, joins me. Welcome, Athena.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Athena has worked for a long time as an educator and healthcare advocate in both urban centers such as New York and Chicago, as well as in more rural areas such as her current home in the Enchanted Mountains of Western New York State. She's also known as a writer and editor of the Franciscan review called Haversack. I've been eager to sit down and talk with you for a really long time to learn more about your Franciscan life, so I'm anxious to get started. Athena, can you just tell me, how did you start embracing the Franciscan path?
Well, I went to a Franciscan high school in Cleveland, Ohio. Actually, I didn't know it was a Franciscan high school, but it was taught by the Sisters of St. Joseph of the Third Order of St. Francis. And it was there that I became interested in religious life, not particularly Franciscan life, because I really didn't know what that was. But I liked the teachers, the sisters, who cared about their students. I learned a lot. I guess maybe I was a little pious also in my younger days too. I wanted to serve God, and the best way to do it was to become a sister. And so I joined this Franciscan community. Now, it was by title Franciscan, but to tell you the truth, during those days of my early formation, what was Franciscan really was the celebration of Franciscan feast days, a special meal that was given at the time, and special liturgies, not much else. Then a little later, it was the time of the Second Vatican Council, and we were to go back to the charism of our founder. And the founder was actually, we saw, a Franciscan founder. So with that, I took my next step with several others and decided that we should be serving people who were really poor. So I was able to go with a small group of sisters to the Bronx. We found an apartment. There were no other members of our religious community there, and we began to live there. It was a mostly African American and a Latino community, a lot of drugs, a lot of people who didn't go to school, et cetera, et cetera. But I soon got involved there, and at that time, I was wearing the little it was a habit, but a little veil, modified, which I wore for a while until one day, walking down the streets in the Bronx, an African-American woman came up to me and kissed my hand. It was at that time that I decided that was not the right symbol that I wanted. That was not the symbol of what I was beginning to see as Franciscan, serving God's people would be. So took the habit off and didn't wear it from that day on.
I have to ask, did you have a conversation with this woman?
No, she just moved on. No, she kissed my hand and took off. And I was surprised, and I just was sort of shocked out of that. So I took off the veil. And during those years, I taught in a public high school in the Bronx, 4,000 students, girls at that time. And they somehow got to know that I was a religious. At that time, it wasn't necessarily Franciscan, but it was a sister. And I was invited to many of their homes to discuss what it was like being a sister. So it was there being in a poor area. We lived in a very poor area. I served in a public school, but soon after that, or 4 years after that, I moved to Chicago because there were a few sisters that wanted to join this small group of us that had done this initial experiment. which was all in accord with the Second Vatican Council. So we moved to Chicago, again in a very poor area of Chicago called Uptown. And I lived there for the next 20 years. And it was during that time that I really became a Franciscan. And by that, I mean, during those years, with another sister, we co-founded an alternative high school for teenagers who had dropped out of the public school system. And I was teaching them, learning about their lives, meeting their families, being in their homes, knocking on their doors if they were late and bringing them to school. But also in that area, there were other women and men Franciscans, small little groups. It was a time of, I think, in the 70s and then the 80s of the experimentation. Small groups would come and live communally. They were social workers and teachers mostly. And at some point during that time, and I'm not really good with dates. My husband, Jean-Francois, is the historian, so I leave that to him. But there was a scholar that moved into the area, a Franciscan scholar by the name of David Flood. And he was an historian. And he began in our living room in our apartment on Kenmore Street in Uptown. We began to hold weekly sessions on the Franciscan movement. He's an historian, so he took it from the historical point of view, which was absolutely marvelous. When I learned about what Francis and Claire, what they and the other men and women at that time had to contend with, and what they did to live a gospel life, it clicked with my own experience of what I was going through and what I was seeing on the streets of Uptown, which was a very poor, a diverse, ethnically diverse community where everybody could walk the streets, whether they were from halfway houses or in wheelchairs, whatever their color. And I just loved it. But it was there that connected. And I tell you, it was in Chicago that I really became a Franciscan.
Can I ask you,
Yeah.
can you tell me more about these sessions in the apartment? To be honest, I've heard about them, and when I lived in California in the 80s, I kept hearing about the Franciscans in Chicago. But can you tell me, take me into that apartment living room and take me into one of those sessions? What was it like?
Well, if David would come in and perhaps we'd go through a discussion of the Testament. And he would begin, we'd read it. He would talk about it from his scholarship, from his historical perspective, as well as his absolute passion for being a Franciscan. And we would have discussion, and he would give us different things to read. And at one point during those sessions, we said, where else can we read more of this kind? Not the pious, St. Francis talking to the birds and that sort of thing, but this real man, these real men, Claire, these real women, where can we read more about it? And he said, nowhere. So that's when a small group of us started the Franciscan magazine in 1977 called Haversack. And Haversack, and that was done by, it started with 4 of us because of this group in our living room, which numbered about 9 or 10 people. He said, well, if you're really interested, write about what you think has happened since post-Vatican with the religious community. So we wrote. So it turned out 4 of us answered that. So it was David, Tom Grady, Alice Trebetowski, and myself. So we decided, we talked about, all right, let's start a publication. Now this is, here we are in Uptown. We don't have any money or anything, but we had these ideas of we wanted to be able to connect our Franciscan heritage, the Franciscan movement and spirituality, with the pursuit of justice, because all of us were working for a just and peaceful world. everybody in that room, whether they were teachers or social workers, or some of them at different times involved in formation work. And it was difficult because we had all sorts of problems with that. How are we going to do this, et cetera? And I remember, I have a vivid memory of myself sitting on the stoop in the apartment house where we lived on one of the steps, and I was crying. And the others, Alice and the others came around and said, "What's wrong?" And I said, if it's a good idea, even if we don't have all the answers, we've got to start. And I guess, I don't know what it was that it convinced them. So we started. And it and it went, and that's how at first, David was the editor for the first 6 or 7 years. And I became editor for 15 of the years. And we began to, what was so wonderful is not only the actual Franciscans in our area by name and by spiritual lineage or heritage, but there were so many people we got to know. The Catholic workers were right down the street from us. And there were other groups of people of other religions who were trying to work for the same world as we could, either in healthcare or in education and so on. So that's how it actually began. I think Haversack sort of fed it as well as the streets of Uptown did. I recall walking one day down Uptown streets and all of a sudden having this wonderful feeling, this is exactly where I belong. This fits so well. It integrates everything, every part of me. So that was the start, and it's Franciscan ever since.
And how'd you come up with the name Haversack?
Well, actually, Alice did. She went through, I think she was going through scripture, and she found this word haversack. We weren't sure what it was, but we liked the name. And then after we decided, we like that name, then we realized there are 2 notices in scripture that speak about the haversack. One of them says, take nothing for your journey, including don't take your haversack. But the other one says that we kept on to, in these evil times, make sure you have your haversack. So that's how it started. It started from actually being published out of Tom Grady. One of the editors is a Franciscan, a brother of Brooklyn, and they used to run it off for us. And that's how we started. We started very, very small, just like we started our school prologue. Very, very small. We ran the school that Alice and I started with. We had 4 of us teaching it for the first year on a total budget of $25,000. And that actually was given by my community, my religious community. So that's how it went. And the years of Haversack brought together diverse people, but people that had the Franciscan spirit, maybe not formally, but they really did. And they were working in various ways to make this world better for everybody. And we would have yearly conferences, Haversack conferences. Once I remember we had bread and wine for the world. And we had a theologian, and we had discussions on what bread and wine for the world really meant. All up in our big meeting room of Prologue, and which the school was on the 3rd floor of an office building. And we had conferences on healthcare. Every year we brought people even from Quebec came in, and it was a beautiful time of relationship, of Franciscan living, really, and work.
Yeah, what I'm sensing are these themes. What I keep hearing you talk about is relationality, building relationships, not just among yourselves of like-minded people, but finding that like-heartedness in diverse populations. You talk about this interfaith community of Uptown and making connections there. So relationality, and then the pursuit of justice.
Right. And at that time, my whole idea of being Franciscan had evolved from my small, although at that time there were about 1,000 members, sisters, to a larger community of men and women, some in religious life and others not. And so it was sort of natural for me to go the next move, I guess, when I met Jean-Francois, another Franciscan. So that also during that, I should probably back up a little bit. In my religious Franciscan community, I had spearheaded with a few others and then led what was at first called an experimental group of women who wanted to work for justice as Franciscans. And that later became a separate autonomous region within the community. And I was the leader of that for about 8 years.
What made it experimental?
Well, because after Vatican II, there were 3 provinces, and they had defined geographic areas, and they had defined roles, teacher and nurses, basically.
Mm.
And so at the chapter, at the legislative bodies where decisions are made, sort of like Congress, I guess, I spoke first to try for the experiment. And then as several of us also got permission to do these things all over the country. So then we were being spread all over, not just in defined geographic areas. We decided, those of us that had quote unquote experimented, that we wanted to be the St. Francis region. We did not want to be a province. We didn't want property. In fact, one of our decisions was not to accept any pension plans, special retirement plans. We would do as regular people, poor people did. And to this day, I never had a pension plan. So these were some big decisions of the group. And the sisters in that group were involved in different works from East to West Coast, including the reservations and worked with in California, developmentally disabled and so on. It was wonderful. And it lasted until as congregations began, religious congregations, Franciscan and other, I guess, began to get smaller, aging members, etc. They decided to put everything together as one. So that unique group dissolved.
Well, I'm wondering if we can maybe move forward a little bit.
Sure.
Curious to know if your Franciscan identity has changed over the years or how it's developed. You're very active in many pursuits now.
Yeah. Well, I am by nature an activist. I think it's by nature. I don't know. When I was in Chicago, I had a big poster of a mother duck with baby ducks on the wall, and it said, "Do something, lead, follow, or get out of the way." So activism is sort of natural for me. I married a Franciscan. So I married Jean-Francois, and both his scholarship continues to inform me, and he brought a lot more of the women. Claire, I've gotten to know more of Claire and the women. And where I live now, we don't have a specific, there are Franciscans, but we don't have a specific Franciscan base. The 2 of us are Franciscans, and all of our close friends who are active with us in all of the endeavors, that's the village, which if you want, I could talk about later. They know we're Franciscan and they're attuned to it. And several of us have also formed a faith-sharing group called the Breaking of the Bread. So we do that. So we're Franciscans without initials, but we are Franciscans.
I like that, Franciscan without initials. Tell me about the village. I think it's fascinating.
Well, I read a book, actually, Sister Margaret Carney's that many people know, lent me a book called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, a doctor, who talks about dealing with people who are elderly, sick, dying, and the problems that he thinks many doctors face, and that they look at the disease and what's wrong with them instead of looking at the whole person. And at some point, he asks, thinking about his own father who was sick and dying, how do you want to live? And I thought to myself, here I am in a rural New York, first time in my life. And I love it. I mean, I look out at the hills. It's very contemplative. And people that I know, all of my friends and others in the area, mostly live by themselves. Many are widows and widowers, some divorced, some in couples, some with children or grandchildren. They want to live in their own homes. And they want to, but they know that as they get older, they will need help. For example, I mean, even today, a bad storm broke a couple limbs of an apple tree. And thank God, another village member and a friend came over and with Jean-Francois chainsawed the tree, worked at it. So you're going to need services and you're going to need help, whether it's for transportation or cooking or just visiting. I went to visit somebody who can't leave because her husband just has dementia. So she's with him. So we just spent a couple hours talking, that sort of thing. So there were several others that wanted that too. They want to stay alone. They may need services and they don't want to be isolated. They want community. And for me, that was probably the most important, the sense of being together. And so we got a small group together. We visited a village in Ithaca, about 2.5 hours away, that had been formed some years ago. By the way, this village is part of a movement called the Village to Village Network. There are, I think, about 290 such villages in the United States, over 20 in New York State alone. So their membership, I mean, you become a member. There is a relatively small fee, although some villages have a lot more, but we're poor. We're one of the poorest counties in New York State and one of the oldest has the oldest members. And so we did all the, institutional stuff. We incorporated, we got our nonprofit status, charity status, etc., with the help of a lawyer who did this for nothing and became a member with his wife. And so it functions. We have events, activities. If somebody needs help, we have a way of contacting them. We get together this all started during the pandemic, so we couldn't physically get together. So fortunately, we did Zoom. And so far, the people that we have, the members, we have right now 56 paid members and other contacts. They have computers, but I've given one talk to one group of seniors. I'm going to give another talk to another group. The age starts at 55 and older. So it's exciting. It's work. And right now, because we have very little money, that's always the reality when you start something, I'm the acting director. So until we can get funds and hire somebody younger than I who can do the work of the village. But it's a wonderful concept. Who wants to be, when you think about it, who wants to be alone?
Right. And being together, sharing wisdom, sharing stories, sharing challenges. It makes the journey easier, doesn't it?
That's right.
So speaking of challenges, what are some of the challenges you've had to face, not just currently, but maybe over the course of your life? The Franciscan path isn't necessarily easy.
No, it isn't. First of all, to discern what the next move is, to find companions, people with you. I always speak of a Franciscan movement. I do not think that Francis or Claire acted alone. I, I, there was a movement, there were people, and that is so very important. So it's building up the relationships. When you go to a new place, it's a whole new ball game, you know. You have to start. So keeping the Franciscan history current, I go back to the readings, and again, I have Jean-Francois, and every time we have a breaking of the bread, a meeting of our group, we have Franciscan texts entered. And, you know, those people in the 13th century are dead, but they're still alive. And I heard a former advisor to the Ukrainian President Zelensky speak about something that connected with our Franciscan sisters and brothers. If people remember us, that means we are still alive. If people remember the early Franciscans and the people that have gone after them, that means we and they are still alive. And that's important. Pandemic, you know that our country is going through rough times. We have many problems. Since 1980, I've been working for universal health care. We don't have it. I don't know if we'll still have it by the time I did, but I do what I can do with another coalition that I started here. I think friends, especially people that have the same spirit, the same soul in a way, really help through difficult times because it's not easy. And as I getting older, I get more tired. I don't have the energy I had when I was 25. And so it's nice to take a little 10-minute nap in the afternoon and not to get up at the crack of dawn if I don't have to, you know? So, yeah. So that's basically it. I don't know. I don't know what else to say. So it's the problems are the external problems of the society, of the world, and the mistakes that we continue to make and the advances that we haven't done. But what helps is the memory of what we have done, what could be done, and the fact that other people have gone before us and they've tried and they've done everything. And again, going back to relationality, the presence of good friends of the same spirit.
Can you tell us a little bit about this faith sharing group that you're in now?
It meets monthly. It's called the Breaking of the Bread, and it's a group, just about 8 of us, and we meet at different houses. Usually Jean-Francois and I do the ritual, but not always. And there's always a Franciscan reflection and text within it. And we share then after. We meet at 10 o'clock, and usually people are leaving around 1, because after our ritual, we continue that with a meal together and call. And those people are also involved in the village, in some of the veggie wheels work that Jean-Francois and I do, taking fresh vegetables. I started that program here to people in low-income housing, for example. They're involved in the Healthcare Access Coalition. So that's what it's great. We have a local church and a Franciscan church, St. Bonaventure, which we do go to. That's in the neighborhood. There are a group of Franciscan sisters that I'm friendly with. I don't know them all too well. Sister Margaret Carney is a member of our village, so she's been close. So that's what we do, and it's sustaining. I've had years and years and years of reading about Francis and Claire and the men and women in that early movement, and that stays with me, and I can always go back to those. I do go back to those pages, but as it is, if people remember us, that means they're still alive. So they're still alive, and so am I.
Going back to that poster that was on your office wall, lead, follow, or get out of the way. It sounds like you've done a lot of leading in your life. And just with the creation of the village, creation of this faith sharing group, you mentioned veggie wheels. Before we wrap this up, can you tell us a little bit about veggie wheels?
Oh, yeah. Well, I began to volunteer with the health department. My background is science, biology, and health. And so I noticed that there are several in this area, several low-income housing complexes in Olean, which is the largest city of Cattaraugus County. By largest city, we mean it has under 15,000 people, but that's the largest city. And the next largest is Salamanca, which is on the Iroquois of the Seneca Indian Reservation, and that's the next one. And they have housing for low income. So since I was brought up on a project by a single mom, and we used to have a peddler come down the alley with vegetables. And my mom always had $3 or whatever to buy fresh vegetables for healthy eating. So since I had that background, I was volunteering in the health department. I learned that hypertension, obesity, diabetes are very high here. And I knew from my experience in both New York and Chicago that people who are poor often have to go places to get either their stamps or whatever they have to go. And I said, why don't we bring it to them? We go to the people. Not only will we give them vegetables and fruit from local farmers, but we will be able to relate. We will meet. We will have that exchange, as we saw in Francis's testament, where he discovered that the leper was really his brother, his sister. And so you bring people from different socioeconomic status, and you become friends, and we get them involved in helping others. So I started that by writing grants. The director, Dr. Watkins, was very happy with it. And he also and his wife are now members of the village. And then I continued as directing it and getting grants, and it found a place in the health department. It is a program in the health department. And now, as I said, I think it should have an employee of the health department directing it. So we do. But in fact, tomorrow, Jean-Francois and I go to Salamanca. And we go to Hillview Manor, which is a senior housing for those with disabilities and seniors. And we bring fresh vegetables actually from this one farm, which is run by a family. The main farmer is a woman. And we take it to them. We show them how to use it if they don't know how. They get it free because fruits and vegetables cost a lot. Fresh vegetables, when I would ask people from the different housing complexes, where do you usually get your food? They say the dollar store. And also in our area, transportation is almost nil. There's one bus that goes sometimes, but can you imagine an elderly person or a disabled person trying to lug things? So we do that, and it's fun. It's wonderful. Over the 7 years, I have met many people there that we continue to relate with, and some of them have become helpers also. So that's the Veggie Wheels, and this is our 7th year. And tomorrow, Jean-Francois and I will be leaving at noon to go to Salamanca for that.
Oh, Athena, you are such an inspiration.
Listen, but you know what? But same thing for you. It's what you get back. It is not one-sided. As Jean-Francois says, so truly, you do mercy with somebody, not for them. So yeah, it's a lovely, it's a exciting, wonderful, energizing life with its pitfalls here and there, but you get through them with others.
Well, thank you so much. Now, before we close, is there anything else you'd like to share?
Not particularly as far as information, but just as an encouragement for all to check out the Franciscans. I mean, that spirit is great. It's a wonderful movement, and that continues today. It is just as alive.
Absolutely. And so many of us are Franciscans without initials, as you said. And we can continue to gain this inspiration from the original text, but then apply them to our lives today. So thank you so much, Athena.
You're welcome, Darleen. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. I'm looking forward to the next interview in this series on Franciscan spirituality as a countercultural path, and invite you back to hear Brother Mark Schroeder, who will share about his life as a Franciscan friar with a particular interest in social justice work. Until then, may you be blessed with peace and all good.